It's my honor to introduce you to our next keynote speaker. I have the pleasure of knowing Jala Makhzoumi for probably more than a decade by now, and closely following her amazing work in raising the profile of the profession across the Middle East region. Jala Makhzoumi is an adjunct professor of landscape architecture at the American University of Beirut, and also the acting president for the Middle East region of NZILA. She studied architecture in Baghdad and received her master's in environmental design from Yale University and her PhD in landscape architecture from Sheffield University in the UK. In her research and practice, Jala pioneers a holistic development approach to landscape design and planning that mediates community needs with ecosystem health, biodiversity protection, and heritage conservation. Jala received a Tomoy's Award for Women in Architecture and Construction in 2013, the European Council of Landscape Architecture Schools Lifetime Achievement Award in 2019, and in 2021, Jala received the IFLA Sir Geoffrey Jellicoe Award for her outstanding contribution to education in practice in a profession. Her talk, Nature, Environment and Heritage, Landscape Architecture Approach to Sustainable Urban Growth, featuring 2 projects, provincial towns in Lebanon and Iraq, will delve deeper into the reconciliation of people, nature, and environment. Please join me in welcoming Jala to the stage.
Kia ora, salamu alaikum. It is such a pleasure to be here. Thank you for inviting me. Thank you, Nada, especially thanks to all the organizers. Thank you, Bruno, for the presentation. I'm going to talk, as Bruno said, about nature and environment and about using nature more. And I will explain about that later. But I thought that I will start with a little bit about the context. I was born, I lived, I taught, I practiced in the Middle East, and the whole context is very different from where we are here today. So I thought I will share a little bit of that with you. So, can we have the first slide, please? Oh, I have to press it. Oh, gosh, sorry. Sorry, okay. Okay, so the Middle East. It is the Fertile Crescent, what was referred to. It is a very old part of our world. And agriculture came to be there, was invented there. And the Fertile Crescent stretches from the land of the 2 rivers, Mesopotamia, modern Iraq, all the way through the Mediterranean aspect of Syria, Lebanon, Palestine, to Egypt. And as you can see, it is the land of the Abrahamic religions. And the first epic, the Epic of Gilgamesh, seeking ever after life, which is in very many ways like the stories of creation in the Bible and the Quran. This is also a region where is mainly arid ecology and semi-arid, so really water is very scarce. And you can see from comparison of the 2 maps in 95 and in 2025, I think, you see that how the dark brown is the critical stage where the withdrawal of water exceeds what is available in terms of water resources. The lovely green landscape that you have here in New Zealand is very, very difficult and environmentally costly to sustain. However, there are native trees which are okay, and beyond that there is the desert. It's not always desert, but it is an important part. This is also a place where that has suffered Western colonization. And I call this colonial legacy, and it comes out in many ways, which I would like to try to explain. Barr's book, the cover of his book, Line in the Sand, is literally that, a line in the sand, where those lands were subdivided through the Sykes-Picot agreement following the First World War, namely following oil pipelines and resources. And what has happened is that this has cut up the land and people. It has undermined physically, geographically, the landscape by cutting up rivers with borders that don't make sense, and also undermined cultural continuities, not only across borders, but also with the past, but not the distant ancient past, as was favored by the Orientalist view of biblical lands and Assyrian Empire and Phoenicians, but rather with grandfathers and grandparents and more recent past and practices. So that is also problematic. A lot of the war, the strife, the social injustice in the region, which is always on the news, is a result of this colonial legacy. And so it's something that we need to live with. Burke and Davis talk in their book on environmental imaginaries how the colonialist view had a very big impact on the land and on the environment in general, not just physically, but it's just the approach of wanting to reclaim this breadbasket of the world, which, of Roman times, but also of this mentality of technological development and improvement that is, of course, very unsustainable. I would like to this has been talked about by Koch and by others. For example, one legacy is that in Lebanon of dams. If you can see the map of Lebanon, Lebanon has a big chain of mountains, 3,000 meters above sea level. So there are coastal rivers, 5 main coastal rivers, but hundreds of little streams and some dry watery courses. And so the French came and suggested dams, those black dots, which don't work and which we don't need. And Bizri Dam is one that I wanted to showcase, just to show this, the environmental imaginary of the colonial era. And of course, it's funded by the World Bank, which often funds very, very weird projects for the environment. I don't know why they do that. And the other problem is that it's always to suck up water from around the capital to the capital city. They forget middle-sized towns and the growing pains of middle-sized towns, which is really, again, a key issue. So this is the Bizri Dam, the image on top. This is another similar dam that was, the Bizri Valley that would be inundated by the Bizri Dam. It's a beautiful valley, historic, with Roman temples, little Byzantine churches, villages, productive agriculturally, in pastoral uses, and people have managed it beautifully without the need of a dam. They built stone terraces, which filters the water and allows it to percolate so that there is really no flooding. But as I said, it is really mainly corruption that drives these projects, unfortunately, very bad corruption, and no accountability in many of the countries where I've worked. Below is Jannah Dam, another dam that precedes Bizri Dam by 6-7 years, where it was started and then never finished. All that happened is that they just destroyed the landscape. So again, this is something that happens a lot. One thing in Lebanon that's good, that we do have a voice. We can stand up and talk. In Iraq, we couldn't. We couldn't object or talk publicly. But in Lebanon, you can. And you can see Bizri, because of the corruption, it's not just the dam, but people were so sick and tired of being denied so much, so that everybody, the whole nation, mobilized and went and camped and broke the fencing for the beginning of construction that was in the valley. And you can see that a lot of it is, we don't have water scarcity, we have corruption. People are very much aware of what is happening. Another example, I wanted to give those two examples to show what kind of problems we are facing. The other problem is a little town in a settlement in the upper Euphrates River Valley, Ana, which is 4,000 years old. It is a town that I visited, again another dam on the Euphrates, because there was a dam in Syria, upriver, because there was another dam in Turkey, further upriver. So it's just an endless chain. So, but what I wanted to show is how ecological. This was the inspiration for the book I co-authored later on ecological landscape design and planning. Because no settlement can be more ecological. It is in the valley. You can see in the section protected by the edges of the valley. Water wheels carry water to higher grounds. It comes down through gravity. Palm trees create a greenhouse effect, allowing for the winter sun to come in and warm. Citrus groves underneath. What we now call permaculture has been there for thousands of years. And then if you look at the fabric, you can see that there is an equal distribution of built, open spaces, paths. So it's almost 1/3, 1/3, 1/3. So it's really a very ecological and sustainable. And in the two, you see the fabric and you see the roads in Ana, the traditional settlement, and you see the new town that was built to house the people who lived in that beautiful settlement. And a lot of money was spent on this. However, the priorities were never the landscape, its suitability, or that it was totally unsuitable. So really, aridity, this this being cut off from traditions and traditional practices of managing resources is a key issue. Another issue is that, as you can see, Bruno showed a map of IFLA, but this is the real map. The areas in light green have no National Landscape Association and no individual members. And you can see I've encircled the part I'm in. I mean, there's a handful of landscape architects, and it is a profession that is not very well understood. And I put this is another colonial legacy, because landscape was introduced by the Brits or by the French when they were modernizing, i.e. transforming Middle Eastern towns and cities. So it came to be associated with a municipal park. So when you say landscape to an average person, it's really the municipal park that they think of. And this is why landscape architects beautify urban scenes and do gardens. That's what they do. So this is the challenge that was facing us. So this is a landscape, but the beautiful Ghaf trees, this is in Dubai, is not a landscape. So one of the main things was, again, in the global south, if you get international recognition, people start looking at you and considering what you're saying. So we got international recognition. together with my colleague, with many colleagues, we established the Lebanese Landscape Association, the first Arab national association to be accredited by IFLA. And it was an amazing event, and we had a conference to celebrate that at the American University of Beirut, showing the different dimensions, landscape and ecology, environment, agriculture. So these are some of the challenges. Just to elaborate a little bit, instead of showing you covers of, but this is very similar to what Kate showed earlier. This is the table I had to prepare for my academic promotion to professorial rank. And it pretty much says what I've been doing. So you can see the 3 tracks of interest and of work. Rural development, because that is where I can reconnect with traditions, recent traditions of managing the land, of people, their aspirations. And urban greening, because we need innovative, creative ways to green. And post-war, because war just happens in that region. So everybody laughed when I first said that we apply a landscape approach to post-war, not reconstruction, I refuse that word, but recovery. And since it's now being used. So this is, again, and you can see for each one of these tracks, you cannot but write, publish, go to conferences, national, speak about what you're doing so people know about landscape architecture. Then, of course, the teaching so that future generations can follow in this amazing profession. And professional consultancies, because without that, there's nothing. We are designers and we have to design, and funded projects. I now move to my talk. This was just an introduction. I hope the rest is not as long. So, environment. I'll talk about environment and nature, and mainly the focus is cities. But environment has, in my lifetime, experienced a key paradigm shift. You can see that in the first column. Environment, when it first came out, the first summit in '72 in Stockholm, was really about resources, pollution, how do we manage these resources? It was about global treaties and agreements, which is amazing and great. But the thing is that by the time it filters to the people, global treaties don't mean that much. And of course, there isn't much of a role for designers. But in the 21st century, with everything we're talking about in this gathering, environment has changed. It's no longer about resources. It's about people and how they value environment. And to them, environment is livelihoods, it's identity, and it's heritage. So this is really what we work with. And because this has become such a strong force, we find ourselves in a new role as facilitators or mediators with national and local governments, but also with funding agencies. Naomi Klein talks about this very much, and she talks about climate change. It is not about energy and power as much as solar power, as it is about human power and people. And she calls for communities to change corrupt corporations, which is, again, what a lot of us have spoke about. Nature, I distinguish between two natures. Nature, because as I said, I'm focusing on middle-sized towns. This is, so nature of cities, namely the virgin environment upon which a settlement was established, and often because of either an estuary, mountains, a port, a natural port. And these features, topography of course, can sometimes still be there under the layers of settlement, for habitation, Sometimes they're not, they remain very little, but they are still very important because they define the character of that town and its identity. And in small towns, we find that because there is more of this, it is much more transparent, like Nelson, for example. So it is our aim to work with that so that it doesn't erode. And nature in cities, of course, is any green space in the city, even if it is a municipal park, a stream, whatever it is. It is partly an expression of nature, and people see it as being in touch with nature. Even though I know that we as professionals realize that environment and nature we use interchangeably, but unfortunately, environment is the one that has developed the science and the tools to describe environment. And it is very objective, and this is why it's used by UN agencies and not landscape, for example, nor nature, because nature is much more subjective. But it is because nature is subjective, and because the stories of creation and nature are so much more evocative and engaging of people that we have to bring nature back into the argument. So that is a little bit of, the focus of what I wanted to talk about. The natural heritage of cities, but heritage in general, has also experienced a paradigm shift. From the earlier 50s, 60s, globalized World Heritage Conventions, IUCN, and which is great, UNESCO. But there is another paradigm, which is very much the new heritage vision. It is multicultural, it's diverse, it integrates nature and culture. You see, IUCN deals with nature and UNESCO deals with culture, and very recently, through protected landscapes, they're beginning, IUCN, to find this category of that breaches both everyday values and not just outstanding values, and so on. So this is, again, something to put in mind. I think the best example of living nature is really here. I am in awe of what is happening in New Zealand, of partly the poetic Maori conception of the world. Their cosmology is incredible, but it's also beautiful. Everywhere I went here, just in the 2 days I've been, there's always a story that is so much nicer and so much more poetic than talking about resources and about the environment, which is so dry. So I love this because I asked Diane Menzies for an example about a river in New Zealand where the community worked to protect it. And she told me about the Whanganui river. And I read about the story of Maui capturing, I won't say it very nicely, but anyway, Maui capturing a very big fish, which turned out to be the northern island, and that he called to the gods, and they shed 2 teardrops, which became 2 rivers, one of which was Whanganui. I mean, how much more poetic can you get? And then, of course, the community working. So to recognize this as a living being, it is a living thing. It's not just a river. Of course, when we talk in ecological terms, we say it's holistic. You cannot take one part, one layer away. But it's so much nicer to say that it's living. And I was reminded by the speaker this morning when he spoke about healing the land. Again, rather than to say detoxify an industrial wasteland, to say healing. So anyway, this is really some inspiration. I go to the first of the projects. Again, a map of Lebanon and Saida. This is, Sidon is a municipality in the dark gray. Light gray is the larger union of municipalities. It is a Phoenician town that is, has a sea fort from Phoenician times and a land fort. It also has amazing agricultural lands, and it is 150,000 population. So it's a small town. It's the third largest town in Lebanon, but very, very special, and a lot of nature. The nature still coming through, the nature of the city. This is a very interesting project because it was an EU-funded project on med cities. The methodology, again, I will explain very briefly, but the project is really not about master plans. It's participatory, so working with the communities. And the aim is really to have local community and local authorities as active players. The other good thing is that there's no master plan, it's more a strategic development framework. So it's very quick so that you can really assess what there is and move on to develop strategies. And the team is an amazing team of, and you can see how interdisciplinary the leader, Huwaida is in cultural heritage, Jad are in economic, institutional framework and governance, and Omar and Julia, urban infrastructure. And you see that under my name, myself and Selwa, landscape is in red. The reason is because there was no landscape. There was only ecology and environment. And when I spoke to them and I said, let's introduce landscape. It's really important. They said, no, you don't understand. This is a serious project. It's not about gardens. And so, in a way, I said, okay, humor me. Just allow me to start with landscape, and you can decide if you want. I'll drop landscape. I can do ecology and environment. But I know what happens. It ends up in a folder, in a drawer, on a shelf, with nothing happening, no action. Landscape does two things. Landscape will, first of all, contextualize it and frame it differently so that it is meaningful to people. If you tell them this is a river, one of the streams, and it's polluted, but if you evoke stories of that stream, then it's another story. So this is a meeting. Shannon spoke about the displacement of the agricultural productive landscape. And that's very much the story. You can see over the years. In black is the historic walled city, which up to the 1930s and 40s was just a tiny bit. And then gradually roadside development, and now more and more. And so one of the aims was how to protect this agriculture as urban productive land. Not very easy, with a lot of realty developers waiting to snatch this land and develop it. And the other was the abandoned railway track, which we thought was an amazing opportunity. It's public, so it's 15 kilometers long and 5 meters wide. No, it's a little more than 5 meters, I think. The other story and the focus was really streams. And these are seasonal streams. Yes, they dry in the summer, or maybe you have nothing, really. But it's still there. When the rains come down, it is there. It will flood, but people don't want to think of that. And Amli River, Amli comes from Comlé because of the foam from the French. It's a corruption of the French word. But you can see it was such an integral part, not just the estuary, but the neighborhoods were built around it, water mills, and people, old people, my age, have that in their memory, but not many. And you can see what happens is that it is channelized, the channels always break, and it is flooded. But why is it channelized? I'll show you why. This is the rivers in Sidon. This is the sewage network. You can see they are one and the same. The sewage network is located in the river course and the streams. Why? Because it's public land and because they can do it. The government can do it and nobody is there to object. Of course, the sewage pipes break and then the water and rainwater and sewage mix and they pollute the sea. And the red points, which is collection points to the sewage processing, then doesn't work in the winter. It only works in the summer, so half the year. So these are some of the problems. So the solution was so easy. Just take the pipe out of the riverbed, create a channel on the side. But there was a law, which is never recognized, of a protective buffer for all water courses. The SIDA USUDS, this Sustainable Development Strategy, is just a strategy. But the good thing about it was that we got on board young architects, no landscape architect, but architects and planners and community members to pick up this vision and go on with it, which is so much better because the project ended and we moved on. So one of them, Lil Medina, which in Arabic means for our city or for the city. And Lil Medina loved this idea. They recreated a booklet with beautiful drawings. They had meetings with the local population and met with them to talk about Al Amli and how important it is and the memories of Al Amli. And the book title in Arabic is Amli River, Greater Saida, Stories of its Disappearance and Revival. So this was what they did. And you can see, they traced the first line, all the water sources, the springs where people would go and gather to collect water. All this, Tasli is really harvesting herbs for cooking, native herbs. And you can see in the diagram how it's in the public property. You take out the channel for the sewage, and then you have a beautiful cycling path and a greenway. And this is really more or less, and the images are just right, not plans or anything, so that people can understand. Of all the project, I mean, of all the different tracks in this project, when I first spoke about the rivers and reviving them, they laughed. The municipality laughed at me. I mean, they're sewers. What do you want to revive, you know? But the thing is that the funding agencies, the EU, came back and funded it. So now there is an implementation of this thing. So there is hope. So it was great in this sense. The second project is in Iraq. And Iraq, I showed you a snapshot of Iraq. And this is Erbil. It is one of the oldest continually inhabited settlements in the world. And the project that I worked on was with Khatib and Alami, and it is about the inner green belt, Erbil inner green belt, and Shannon spoke about green belts. It's a concept that's gone out of fashion because we have wedges and we have greenways and so on. But the green belt was there not so much to protect agriculture, really, but to contain urban sprawl, because Erbil became the capital of the newly independent region, the Kurdish region in Iraq. This is in North Iraq. And so you can see from the GIS map, you can see the streams and waterways that cross the traces of the greenbelt. And it's so funny that the greenbelt should be a perfect circle. I mean, even a second-year student wouldn't do that, but that's what the master planners did. And then there was an outer greenbelt. But as I will explain, just to show you some images. This is some of the water courses. Again, they're seasonal. And the agriculture is mainly rain-fed. There is enough rain to sustain wheat and barley, which is what is planted. It's a hilly landscape. And there are 23 terribly impoverished villages. And a lot of them are sharecroppers because the lands are owned by others. This is also a very significant site because of the genocide that happened in 1988 of the Kurdish people. And you can see in the upper sketch, this was from the field study, in some places I only saw gravestones, usually on hills. These were the ones that the bulldozer couldn't reach, but the villages were completely gone, eradicated, just thrown away. And in their place was farmsteads, people just came back and created something. So this is, again, a very important layer of the memory of in Erbil. The team, again, interdisciplinary, and Edgar was amazing. He was the lead, the project lead and the master planner. And he showed that we really don't need an outer green belt. We only need an inner green belt. And if you look at all the spaces available and the projection of population, this was important. I will show you later on, because, no, it's okay. It was important because of this ridiculous circle does not fit with the village cadastral maps. So the villages were cut, segmented, and so when you do this, I will show later on, it allows it. Okay, another part of the story. When we arrived, I remember a professor in the agriculture faculty told me, you know what, you really don't bother to make a design. It's all there, we know it. I said, really? I was very curious to see how did they already have a conception of the design. He said, nothing, you just forest the whole thing. You create, forested lands. That's it. It's a no-brainer. And it's frightening because this was really the thinking of the ministries and the authorities we were meeting with. And they assured us that all the villages were on their way to be evacuated and that the lands would be expropriated for the Erbil Greenbelt, forgetting that the whole point of the Greenbelt was to stop urban sprawl. You kick them out, they come back to the city, besides of the injustice. So we tipped after looking at what there was, and we said, no, people are at the heart of this project. What the project will do, the Greenbelt, will improve their lives, will improve their livelihoods, will protect the natural heritage in the peripheries of Erbil. And as you can see from the diagram, and this is a little bit about the heritage. How did I argue this? Because it was very, very alien to them. I said, look, I am half Kurdish. So I said, look, you're so eager to define Kurdish identity. There you go. This rural landscape is your identity. You want to erase it? And of course they didn't. So this is the Greenbelt. But I wanted to comment a little bit on the agriculture. We had a very clever professor with us at AUB that worked on the agriculture. And so we looked to move away from the wheat farming, grain, because because of the unpredictability and the effort, and to perennialize the agriculture so that we have fruit trees which could have like olives, like carob, like a lot of stone fruits, and to look at the same time, look at agri-industries and enterprises, but the colors and the zones you see on the map, because for each region there's a different topography, there's a different landscape, and there's a different strategy for developing the agriculture. And branding was another, so that the products of the Greenbelt, so it's an economic way to generate income. Another was the northern and southern greenways. So it's protected with some very little shelter planting that can become like promenades. But more important, you can see how it crosses across to the rural and links the villages so that they are all connected. And this is something, again, very important. And of course, this is what they were looking for. This was the main aim, again, amenity landscapes for the people of Erbil. Nobody was thinking of the villagers. And this very quickly, it's just to look at how landscape can multifunction. Socioeconomic value, heritage value, and ecological and environmental value. For the villages, what we did, for natural pastoral lands, reforested lands in some places, and the agriculture. So to conclude, I found it amusing that in Sidon, I used nature to humanize environment. We took nature stories and people and how they reacted with it. Whereas in Erbil, to protect nature, we had environmental arguments and ways to rationalize why we should protect it, because they wanted sustainable design, and they could not quite see what the value of nature was. This is what I wanted to talk about. When Edgar argued that we don't need the outer green belt, what it meant is that at least the green belt would not have this form, but would include all of this. So again, looking to this is very important. But some of the takeaways for me were, first of all, continuities. I talked about ruptures and discontinuities, ecological and cultural. And this is really important to have, to breach administrative boundaries. We're often defined by administrative boundaries, to go beyond them, and also ecological ones. Oh, sorry. Building linkages again. One of the things we did was the village heritage path that linked the villages, and it could be a way for agritourism and nature tourism. And again, the northern greenway that I showed is another one of looking at this. Urban growth that builds linkages in Sidon, it was very different. I didn't talk, as I said, the time is short, but this is a map of the religions in Sidon. Yellow is the administrative Sidon, which is primarily Sunni Muslim. Orange is Christian villages. And the red is Shi'i Muslim. And there is a lot of conflict. You might not, but there is. And so what was amazing about Saida is that when we worked on Emily, on that stream, and on those streams don't stop with the administrative boundary. They don't stop here. They continue. And this continuation was an excuse to force communities and those different municipalities to sit down and negotiate what they would do, not to accept to do, because what's the use of cleaning the streams downstream if upstream it was not dealt with? So this was an amazing, I think, lesson learned. And again, accessible nature. To have nature accessible through a multi-layered approach and multifunctional. And so you can see with Erbil the different layers, the amenity, the agriculture, nature conservation. We had key protected areas for nature, and the greenways protecting the waterways. And for Sidon, it was, again, I use this because to show the multi-dimensionality of landscape, of water courses, ensuring environmental health, socioeconomic benefits as a heritage, and amenity and living qualities. So this is more or less, I would like to conclude with this. Robert Adams yesterday said that it takes, I'll rephrase, it takes small steps, but to be consistent, and then we will have change. And I agree, and I think I love Esteva's argument that turning the whole argument of what development is. And again, real social change does not happen as a series of cataclysmic moments associated with great leaders, but through daily transformation conceived and implemented by ordinary people. Thank you.
Thank you, Jala. What a fascinating presentation. We've got about 10 minutes for some questions. So if we've got some questions for Jala, there's a couple of microphones kicking around.
Salam alaikum, Jala. Welcome to New Zealand. Hey, just a real quick question. You haven't touched on it, but I'm sure you've got an opinion on it. Hi, I'm just below the bush.
I couldn't see you, sorry.
That's okay, no problem. So I spent a little time working in the West Bank in Jordan, and in the 90s there was quite a significant impact with international design firms, the really big ones from predominantly Western nations coming through and having an impact on local culture and particularly landscape ecologies. I guess we're in 2023, so it's been a while since I've been in the neighbourhood. What is the impact of the big international design firms coming into the Middle East at the moment? Is it positive? Is it neutral? Is it negative?
Yeah, sorry, international?
Yes.
International what, sorry?
Design firms.
Ah.
So that sort of continuous
It
colonization.
Depends. It depends on who is hiring them. A lot of them come to do volunteer work, pro bono, and then they have amazing impact. And as I said, in the developing world, people coming from abroad are always listened to. You know, there's always an ear for them. But if they come with corporate power, they will do more damage. One of the, I mean, in that table I showed with the tracks of research, I did not write activism. But this is, again, I forgot, but this is one thing I wanted to talk about. Activism is a little different from the activism that was spoken of here. It's not so much about global warming and climate change, because that is not top of the list. It's more about rights, social justice, being marginalized, and all of these issues not being able to survive. So one of those corporate big firms comes to Beirut and takes up all the coastal areas because, of course, they're prime locations for hotels and for businesses. So that kind of landscape architecture is disastrous. And in one case, a very famous international architect was commissioned to prepare a design, and we, as the campaign to save the Dahlia of Raushi, wrote to this person and said that, do you realize that this is public land, it's publicly accessible, and that you will be depriving people from their heritage and from the only nature spot in the city of Beirut, the capital. And he dropped the project. So it varies. Yeah.
Thank you, that's great.
Yeah.
Thank you for a very interesting and inspiring presentation. Early on, you showed a map of the world, actually, I think, and it showed that the areas in the Middle East that were using more water than the environment can provide has increased over time. And I just wondered if any of your work has touched on that, the availability of water and how it's used?
Yeah. I think Lebanon would be a very good example. Lebanon is one of the few countries in the region that has plenty of water resources. But it is inefficient use, one. Again, corruption, that impedes, the proper utilization. Lebanon could even give water to neighboring countries because it really has plenty. But again, it's mismanagement that often is a problem. Another problem is that I'm sure it's in other places as well. Management of water resources is so fragmented. I had a slide and then I removed it. There are 3 bodies that manage it. Ministry of Environment puts the limits for protecting water courses and so on, but doesn't deal with the water as a resource. Ministry of Energy and Water deals with the water, actually the flow. And then another ministry deals with the development and design. And often there is just no relationship between the 3. And then it goes further down, into smaller administrative units. So in a sense, a landscape approach is the only one where you can begin to make the authorities, central and local, to look at the living being that is a stream, and rather than to look at it as a channel with water flowing in it. But yeah, water is a problem. In Jordan, it's a very big problem. But the thing is that there were always water shortages. This is, again, it is growing cities, unsustainable use, and of course, climate change that is affecting arid regions with greater aridity and desertification, and wetter regions with more water and flooding. So we're the other side of the coin, but it is as disastrous. One thing, for example, again, going back to this traditional, during the 2006 war, when I was applying a landscape approach, I took a studio down to a war zone, and AUB, the university, made each one sign a paper that if you die or if a cluster bomb explodes, we're not in charge. Your parents are responsible. But anyway, we went there. One of the things that I came to realize is all the villages in southern Lebanon harvest the rain. It is incredible. They have communal ponds. How can you, in a hilly landscape, design it so that the water flows into this pond? I honestly, I can't think of how they do this. And these amazing pools, communal pools, which they use, now are looked down upon, and they're being filled with soil to make a municipal park, because that is the sign of development. So again, during the post-war recovery, we convinced them with engineering students from AUB to repair the water, the lining of the pond, and to revive this practice. So there are a lot of practices, but again, they are looked at as the past and not valued. So that is again another problem. Yes.
Hi, I'm Timo Neubauer. I'm actually a local here from the Nelson region. We don't actually have a green belt or a formalized green belt around our township here. Yet that still doesn't stop us from having an informal green belt, obviously. But that is under threat. That is under immense threat from urban sprawl, not too different to what you described there. Our community hasn't really come around to wanting to protect this informal green belt in any way or fashion. In fact, that urban sprawl is somewhat facilitated by council. How did the communities in those areas and townships that you described actually come to wanting to protect those areas from development?
Thank you. It's a good question. They didn't. the short answer. The one good thing about a dictatorial regime is that they just say there is a green belt and there is a green belt. So that's what happened. But and sadly, that project was an amazing project, but it was not at all participatory. I mean, we could barely convince the authorities to let go of their initial idea of reforesting the whole greenbelt. But I think the answer lies partly in what I showed and what Shannon presented. To look again back at this emerald necklace kind of scattered sort of belt, virtual belt, and to look at the potential. I'm sure there are pockets that are important for biodiversity. So they could be like little key protected areas. And then there are others that could be productive for some, products, agriculture or so on. But if you diversify, and again, a landscape approach that weaves through it, a path through it, it's how you frame it. It's how you frame it. To frame it as heritage, as the heritage of Nelson. And Nelson has a very, very distinct character with the foothills at one and the bay. You really need that kind of green buffer, no matter how small. Maybe in some places you will not succeed and the sprawl will continue. But even if you do it in segments, it's still worth it. That's the best answer I can give. Okay. Thank you.